Today I'm going to try to fit a decoder to my non-DCC ready loco in N-gauge. How hard can that be? So there's a few things I'm going to need for this project. The first is a loco. This one's mine. I bought this on eBay because it was cheap. It's got lots of wheels and I could use a DC controller to drive it in order to test it on curves and inclines. It's the Duchess of Sutherland, and I believe it's what's known as a Poole model, meaning it was made in the Graham Farish factory in Poole before production was moved out to China. I'm also going to need a DCC decoder chip. I've got this one, which is a Digitrax SDXN136. It's actually a sound decoder, which means it's got this small speaker attached. It also comes with an 8-pin plug, but I won't be able to use that because my loco is not DCC ready, and so it doesn't have a socket to receive it. I'm also going to make a few modifications to the loco. I've got a set of tender pickups here, which I want to add to the tender. That means that the wheels on the tender will also be able to pick up the electric, and so it should run more smoothly over dead spots, run without stalling. And I need this, which is the crucial ingredient that will make this conversion work. It's called a digi-hat. In fact, what it actually is a few very small pieces of plastic contained in this bag. It's used for isolating one of the brushes in the motor in the loco. In these locos, the actual chassis is used as part of the electrical circuit, and you need to break that connection so that you can separate the motor from the pickups and electrically put the DCC decoder chip in between. There's a few more things I'm going to need. I'm going to need a soldering iron to do some soldering, and so I will need some solder and some flux. I've also got this, which is I think called a helping hand. It's very useful just for holding things in place while you solder them. I've got here a couple of tools for cutting and stripping wires, and most crucially I've got a tray. The tray is to put the loco on when I take it to bits so that I don't lose any screws. Let's get to it. In order to take this to bits, I think the first thing I need to do perhaps is to remove the tender and the truck at the back. I think that will just get that out of the way. There we go. So put that to one side, and I think the next thing I can do is remove these wheels at the front. I don't quite remember what they're called. No, that was the wrong decision, I think. Oh dear. Right, that's a very long screw. I think the fact that it's long means that it I think it holds something on the inside that's a bit higher up, so that's perhaps a mistake. Never mind. But having removed that, I can now access this screw at the front. And I believe if I take that off, I can then ease off the shaft. There we go. That all just comes off very easily. Here we've got the motor with the worm gear at one end. Just in here are the coils and the magnets. And this section here is where the electricity acts or is provided to the motor. There's a piece in here, I forget its name, that distributes electricity to the coils. And under this piece here is one of the brushes, and I believe that's powered by this wire. And just behind this wheel is another piece just like this with the other brush. And it's that brush that we need to isolate from the chassis. So first thing to do is to find a way of removing the wheels so we can access that brush. Of course, removing the wheels is also going to involve removing the pickups which act on the wheels. So you can see I've taken the bottom plate off that's got the pickups in it. Let me just show you the pickups. There we go. So I've taken that off. And now you can see the axles. There we go. 1, 2, 3. Now these will just lift straight out. I think what I'm going to do is unhook the rodding from the back axle, and then there you go. I could just take that straight out, and if I do the same for the front axle, yeah, just straight on, yeah, got that out. Now my middle is connected up to the rodding there, which that's going to be funny. Yeah. But I think I'm going to just leave that middle wheel where it is, because I can now get access here to the clip and the brush. I don't think I need to do anything about that, so I think I'm going to just leave that alone. Okay, so I've got the front and back wheels off, and I've now got free access to this clip. So there's a clip. Under that there should be a spring and the brush and the thing that holds them. So the next thing I need to do is to take off this clip. I just need to be a bit careful doing this because I don't want to lose the spring or the brush. Okay. So if I take that off, under there, maybe you can see there's a tiny spring. That's out. And then in there should be the brush. There we go, and it just falls straight out. And there you can see there's this brass piece. So I get the screwdriver on, there you go. That's going to come out nice and smooth. So that comes straight out. And if I put the digi-hat next to it, you can see the digi-hat is just a nylon version of this brass hat. So all I have to do now is put the digi-hat in there, put the brush and the spring back in, and I then have to insulate this clip from the chassis by putting these other bits of plastic that come with the digi-hat over the ends, and put that back on. That'll hold it in place, and then the brush will be isolated from the chassis, hopefully. but connected to this clip. So I can then solder a piece of wire to this clip and take that to the DCC decoder. That'll be my phone. So before I put it all back together, I think I'm going to get some IPA and just clean this all up, and generally give the loco a bit of a service so that hopefully it'll run nice and smooth once it's all back together. So I've given everything a bit of a clean up, including the wheels. Cleaned up the insides where the pickups will run against those, and cleaned up the chassis. So the next thing I need to do is to solder a wire onto this clip. I believe the place to do this is just along here in this recess. So I will try and give that a go. The first thing is to just rough it up a little bit with the file. And I'll then put on a little bit of flux and see if I can get the soldering iron going. So I've done some soldering, and you can see I have this wire attached to the spring, soldered onto the spring. So I believe the next bit is to fit this small insulating sleeve over the end there. And the other one, which is still in the packet. There we go. And now I can fit the actual digi-hat in the chassis. And then I have to put the bush in. Now apparently you have to look carefully at the end of the bush and see how it's been worn. Whoops. And fit it that way round. Otherwise you don't get such a good connection back onto that. I believe the bit it connects to is called the commutator, but I might be wrong. So I'll try and get that on. Whoops. Okay, so after a lot of trouble I've managed to get that in. In fact what I did was put the bush into the digi-hat and then put the digi-hat into the chassis. But there we go, more than one way to skin a cat. So now I'm going to try and get the spring back in. Okay. And now finally the clip over the top to hold it all on. Now there is a little note in the instructions that says to be careful not to tear the insulation when doing this. perhaps work a bit better. So I'm just going to slide the insulation over the wire. I don't think it said that in the instructions. This is not easy. So I think that's fitted. The next thing I need to do is to get a multimeter and check that there's no connection between that brass clip and the chassis. So that tests out okay with the meter. So I think I can move on. So it's good practice to connect across this motor to make sure the motor runs. So I'll try that next. So I've got here my dodgy DC power controller, and I can attach one end to here, which is connected to one of the brushes. I've just got to move the wheel away from the motor, and there I see the motor spins nicely. That's very pleasing. Lots of sparks between the brushes and the commutator. Perhaps that's what's supposed to happen. Perhaps you can see that. Very nice. So I've done a bit of soldering. Let me show you what's going on here. So this is the orange wire that comes from the Digihat. That's fine. And then I have soldered on this grey wire, and that goes to what was left over from the capacitor connection to the other brush. And I've also soldered on this red wire here, which connects to the chassis. And I've insulated the joints, the soldered joints, with some black heat shrink, so we don't get any shorts to the chassis. So the next thing I need to do there's one more connection, which will be the black wire from the other pickup that's not connected to the chassis, but that will come through a bolt that comes through here. So what I'm going to do now is put the pickups back on, put the wheels back on, and then hopefully the whole thing will hold together a bit better, and I can start worrying about the wiring and work out how I'm going to get the DCC chip connected. Well, I thought it was all going a bit too well, and it turns out that it was all going a bit too well. I've put the wheels back on, and there's a bit of a problem. The problem is that the insulation that goes over the clip, which you can just see sticking out there, is very tight, and it causes it rubs against the wheels, this wheel at the back, and in fact it rubs so much that it completely seizes up the whole mechanism. So that's obviously not going to work, and I'm going to have to take the wheels off again and try and find another way of making this happen. So very disappointing. I sort of understand the principle of what I need to do, but I can't work out how to do it. So it's the next morning, and the forum experts have had their say, and there's a suggestion that I put this thing together slightly incorrectly. The way I'd done it, I had the wire coming off the front there, and stressing it should have been at the back, and there would have been more room then for it to emerge, and the wire wouldn't be pressing up against the side of the wheel. Let me just see what I think about that. If I put the axle on, there is just a little bit of room there where the clip's going to come up for the wire to emerge. So I think I'm going to have another go. I'm going to solder the wire on in a slightly different place, and go from there. See if I can get it to work. Okay, so I've had another go at soldering here, and I've tried to put the wire very much on one side of the clip. So the hope is the wheel is going to be here, and this wire isn't going to impinge on it, and it's going to slip up the be sort of off at the corner, and so not foul the wheel. So I'll put the insulation back on the clip and see if I can make it fit. Okay, I've managed to get the clip back on, and you'll see I've got the insulation on the clip. So hopefully that's isolated from the chassis. I can test that in a moment. But you'll see the wire is coming off this corner here, and hopefully the wheel will run around there and it won't impinge. But we can test that now by just popping the wheel on. That's better. That's a lot better than it was. It's still quite stiff. If I try applying some power, okay, so that's sort of turning, but it looks like there's a problem with the rodding. So I've spoken to the internet again, and they've pointed out my mistake. So I'll explain to you what that is. You just take the lid off this loco again. And if I take the back wheel off, we go. Look at that. So I can take the back wheel off without even removing the pickups. If I have a look at the clip and the insulation on it, that insulation is actually heat shrink. And the instructions say that I should heat it with the side of a soldering iron. That'll cause it to shrink down. And it means the whole thing will fit much better, I think. So that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to take the clip off again and have another go. So the instructions say to heat this with the side of a soldering iron. So I'll be happy to do. And that does seem to have shrunk down quite a bit. I wonder if you can see that. See if I can get it in focus for you. I can see that's going to work a lot better. Okay, so I'm feeling quite positive about this now. I think this might, well, that's certainly the best I'm ever going to get, I think. So let's try and put it back on and see if we can make it work. Okay, so I've managed to get the wheel back on. There is a little bit of movement in it from one side to the other, just a little. So I think we might be able to get that to go without rubbing. Just got to put it back together a bit. So having done all that, it's time to attach some power and see if the wheels will turn. Look at that. So I've obviously got it running. It seems to be going quite nicely. The wheels do wobble a little bit. I wonder what I can do to improve that. What I have done is I've put a bit of a bend in the rod that goes across the three wheels because it kept coming out. But that seems to have solved that particular problem. I think this is a success for the Digi-hat. The next thing to do is to try and get the decoder working. And I think that might be the next video. Well, it turned out that the biggest problem I had there was not reading the instructions. It was certainly a challenge installing my first Digi-hat, but I'm pretty pleased that I've managed to get it done. I don't think I'd hesitate to try to install a Digi-hat in another loco now. Now that I've done it, it seems quite easy. I hope you'll be able to join me for the next video when I'll be installing the DCC sound decoder into this locomotive, and we'll see if we can get it running on the layout.